procedures. As we know, Governor Walz has declared a peacetime emergency in response to COVID-19, and the Met Council has determined it's not practical or prudent to conduct in-person committee meetings. Accordingly, Met Council members will participate in this meeting by phone or other electronic means, and this Community Development Committee meeting will be conducted under Minnesota Statute Section 13D.021. This meeting is conducted by WebEx and will be recorded. Members of the public will be able to monitor this meeting by clicking the link on the agenda to view the live stream. And we'll call the roll for each item. And if there are no questions, I'll call this meeting to order by taking attendance by roll call to ensure we have a quorum. So Michelle, please call the roll.
Yes, Chair Lilligren. And Councilmember Lindstrom, let me know in advance that he will not be attending today. I will start with Atlas Ingebrigtsen. Chambliss.
Here.
Cummings.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Lee.
Here.
Lilligren.
Here.
Musse.
Here.
Vento.
Here.
Wolf.
Here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. We have a quorum. The first item on our agenda is approval of the agenda. Members can see the posted agenda. And if there's no objections or changes, then we can move on to our business. Any changes to the agenda? Changes. Hearing none, the next item on the agenda is our minutes from the February 16th regular Community Development Committee meeting. Is there a motion to approve, please?
Wolf moves approval. Second by Chambliss.
Thank you. Thank you, council members. And any discussion, additions or corrections? Hearing none, Michelle, please call the roll on the motion.
Yes, Chair Lilligren. Atlas Ingebrigtsen. Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Lilligren.
Aye.
Musse.
Aye.
Vento.
Aye.
Wolf.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. That item is adopted. The minutes are approved, and we'll move on to our business agenda. Just one item, it's consent. It's the City of Rogers Land Use and Density Rating Comprehensive Plan Amendment, business item 2021-55. Is there a motion to approve?
Mr. Chair, Johnson moves.
Thank you, Councilmember. Is there a second?
Vento seconds.
Great. The motion's properly before us. Any discussion on the motion? Discussion. Hearing none, Michelle, please call the roll on the motion.
Yes, Chair Lilligren. Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Lilligren.
Aye.
Musse.
Aye.
Vento.
Aye.
Wolf.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. That item is adopted, and we'll move on to our final item on the agenda, information item. It's a project-based voucher program offer and award discussion, and Terry Smith will lead that discussion. Ms. Smith, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm excited to be here. That's a mouthful, but I'm here today to talk to you all and have some discussion on the policy decisions that will need to be made regarding the offer and award of project-based vouchers. But before I get there, Mr. Chair, if I could introduce a staff person to you all. Stephanie Paulson, you've probably seen her name on here each meeting. And so Steph, if you want to take your camera on for a minute. Stephanie is our assistant director in the HRA, and although she's been on board for several months, we just hired her replacement, and now Chong Lau, and Chong is getting up to speed and taking on most of her duties. So you will start to see Stephanie presenting business items to you all in the coming months. So I just want you to be able to see her and put a face with a name. There she is.
Thanks, Ms. Smith. And
Yeah.
Ms. Paulson, welcome. We look forward to seeing more of you here in committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Stephanie has been employed at the council for, is it 9 years, Stephanie?
Yes.
Yes. And so she started as an HRA coordinator, then she became a coordinator too. Then she was a supervisor, and now she's our assistant director. So she brings lots and lots of experience and was in public service with Anoka County prior to that. And we're just super excited to have her in this role. So just wanted to introduce you so you can look forward to seeing her at future meetings.
Great, thank you.
So back to my item. So I'm here to talk to you and have some policy discussion on the offer and award of project-based vouchers. Next slide, please, Greg. So to just sort of set the stage and remind us all, the Metro HRA has 6,872 housing choice vouchers. HUD allows housing authorities with discretion to project base up to 20% of the total vouchers. And in some cases, we can even go up to 30%. The current council approval, as outlined in the administrative plan, is to project base up to 20% of our vouchers. The chart at the right sort of shows the unit split. So the areas in blue represent the housing choice vouchers. So we have 5902 of our vouchers connected to tenants. The green section shows project-based vouchers that have actually been awarded, including this most recent award. So we have 970 of our vouchers that are dedicated to specific units within the communities that we serve. And if we were to go to the full 20%, we have 404 left that we could project base in the future. These vouchers are awarded currently in 55 separate projects in 33 communities throughout the region. 37 of the developments have supportive service components and serve some sort of specialized population, such as people experiencing homeless, people living with disabilities, veterans, etc. And then 18 are general occupancy, meaning there are no special requirements other than the eligibility criteria and the requirement to be a low-income household. Next slide, please. So that you've seen this slide a couple of times over the last 6 months as we've had our discussions on project-based vouchers. But the primary difference between tenant-based and project-based vouchers are that tenant-based or the housing choice voucher program, they're connected to the tenant and the tenant moves unit to unit with their voucher. And with project-based vouchers, we're committing a voucher to a specific unit within a given development. Under the tenant-based side or the housing choice vouchers, tenants have locational choice. To some extent, you know, they're looking on the open rental market, looking for a landlord willing to participate in the program, and they can move to any city or any state that has a voucher program once they have that voucher in hand. Under the tenant-based vouchers, a tenant's burdened with, again, finding a landlord willing to accept a voucher. And as we've talked over a lot and some previous meetings, you're all very well aware of the tight rental market that's existing right now within the Twin Cities region and frankly all across the state. And so finding landlords willing to accept a voucher has become somewhat of a challenge. Under the tenant-based side, the voucher openings are generally filled with waiting list applicants, so people that are on the Section 8 waiting list. I'm going to show you a map, a series of maps in a few slides that will show sort of the concentrations of voucher holders and where voucher holders are living with their vouchers. And I would say they're less administratively burdensome to administer because we don't own the units. We don't hold a contract we hold a contract, but they're renting from a private landlord. On the project-based side, the locational choice is somewhat limited because the tenant either takes a unit that's available that is open and has a vacancy. So locational choice is limited. Tenants that are in project-based voucher units are eligible to move with a housing choice voucher after 1 year. So after living in a project-based voucher unit for 12 months, they can contact the Metro HRA and say, I'd like to move to another unit, renting from a private landlord. And assuming we have a voucher available, we would give them a voucher to move. And in my 20 years doing this work, we've had a freeze in place a few times for project-based voucher movers. One of those was last year in 2020 when we were in a shortfall status. But once vouchers become available, the federal regulations require that we issue those project-based voucher, mover vouchers before we take people from the waiting list. Under the plus side, the landlords are already committed to the program, so they're committing to a number of units in a development. Some of the project-based voucher developments that we have only have 4 project-based vouchers and maybe a 50-unit building. Others, the entire project or the entire development has vouchers attached to that. But they're generally landlords that are committed to the program, are mission-based organizations that apply for the vouchers. Under this side, the general occupancy units are filled with the waiting list, and the supportive units are filled through coordinated entry or referral from service providers, direct referral. And I have a slide that sort of illustrates this in a few more slides to sort of show you how that works. The awarding project-based vouchers, of course, ensures permanent affordable housing. Units are placed in additional neighborhoods throughout the region, and they can be a tool for affordable housing developers to compete for other public financing. Next slide, please. So there are a variety of ways that as an agency we can offer and award project-based vouchers. The federal regulations require some sort of competitive process be used to award the vouchers. So there has to be some sort of competition connected to it. But we can choose our own competitive process, or we can collaborate with other agencies such as Minnesota Housing to use another competitive process. So the box on the far left, this is PBVs have historically been offered through Minnesota Housing's Consolidated RFP process. So as many of you know, Minnesota Housing issues a competition each year where developers can come in and apply for a variety of public financing, which would include tax credits, first mortgages, some subsidy programs, and other local and state funds, such as our own Livable Communities grant dollars, and in many cases, project-based vouchers. But owners and developers that apply through that process can also apply for project-based vouchers. And this, again, has historically been how we've offered and awarded project-based vouchers through the years. But owners that put in applications through this process are first ranked by Minnesota Housing. And so if they make it through, they call it a gate 1 cutoff. If they make it through the first cutoff, then they continue to be considered for funding. And then if they make it all the way through the process, projects that get all their financing would then be forwarded to Metro HRA for ranking. So we only would get the projects that were going to receive all of their funding through that process. In the middle bucket here, we have an opportunity, and we've done this a few times over the years, but it's been a long time. With the exception of 2020, we decided to issue an RFP independently from Minnesota Housing in advance of Minnesota Housing's RFP process. So we issued an RFP last May, you may recall this, and again, in advance of Minnesota Housing's RFP process. Developers were then awarded preliminary project-based voucher awards, so they were able to go in with their tax credit or other financing application through Minnesota Housing and get additional points for having a commitment of project-based vouchers ahead of time. And I use the word commitment, but it was sort of a soft commitment because although we offered up to 200 vouchers through that process, the RFP required that developers received all of their necessary financing by the end of 2020 in order to get the formal project-based voucher award. And so initially we offered 200 project-based vouchers, and there were only 85 of those. So we gave preliminary awards to 196 vouchers, and there were only 85 that got all of their financing to move forward to become sort of a financially feasible project. So those 85 were formally awarded by you all in the first part of January. And the remaining 115 vouchers that had soft commitments, all of those developments will have to come through at a later date when we offer and award project-based vouchers again. And the reason we do that is so we don't have vouchers just sitting on a shelf waiting for projects to get their financing. Some projects may go through the tax credit process, 4 years in a row, for example, before they get their financing, and we don't have the ability to shelve vouchers for that long, which is why we had the deadline of December 31st. So at any rate, we awarded 85 project-based vouchers through this process. Some of them were existing housing, as you may remember, so we'll be entering into contracts very soon for those to become occupied by eligible families. But others are new construction, so they won't even come online for a year and a half, or in some cases even 2 years. And then the last bucket here on the far right, the regulations allow PBVs that can be awarded directly to projects that were selected based on a previous competitive process. So example would be projects that maybe were awarded tax credits in previous years, or housing infrastructure bonds, or home funds, or really anything that our policy would allow. And so, for example, a project that received tax credits last year, we could use that as sort of the competitive process and just go in behind the public competitive process and award project-based vouchers. We've never done that because it gets very, very complicated in terms of developing criteria as to when the council would do this, how many vouchers would we award, how much public financing would we require a development to have. We would be in a position of underwriting projects for financial feasibility, which is something that we currently don't have in our infrastructure and our capacity within the Metro HRA. And it's, as I think about it, I think the volume would be overwhelming because there are a lot of projects that get public financing, and so managing that volume would be tough, but I think the underwriting piece is probably the biggest piece. So in summary, there has to be some sort of competitive process connected to the award. Next slide, Greg.
Do you want questions at the end?
I'm happy to, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to take questions.
Yep.
Unless I may defer if there's something I know I will answer in a future slide, I may defer you, but I'm happy to take questions as we go if Mr. Chair, that's fine by me.
Yep, thanks, Ms. Smith. Go ahead, Councilmember Chambliss.
Okay, if Greg can move to slide number 4, the previous slide. So my question about the option on the right, which would be new, I think, or maybe not as popular from past experience. Is this new, or have you had experience with it?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Chambliss, it's not new in the regulations. We have just not exercised our option to offer an award in this manner just because of the complication and the need to have underwriting capacity in-house, which is what, something we don't have. For example, determining financial feasibility of a project. It's just not something, so it's not something we've done.
Okay. Can you speak to why it would be here as an option, or why for our organization or other organizations it would be a benefit?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Chambliss, I think it eases the administrative burden of issuing an RFP on your own. For example, we have a very large program. There are some housing authorities across the country that have very small programs. So if a housing authority, and this is something, our council could do too, if you wanted to target funds to specific types of developments, for example, and we wouldn't have to issue a full competitive process. You could just award them without the full, administrative burden of the competition, within the housing authority. And so there are no housing authorities here locally that are doing this. And I think it's, I'm not sure on a national perspective if housing authorities are using this, but it's an option if we wanted to, develop specific criteria for offering in this way.
Okay, I'm very curious about it because, a lot of times, if we continue to do things the same way.
Mr. Chair, I don't know, can anyone else hear?
Councilmember Chambliss.
Oh, sorry, I was muted.
Yeah.
Or accidentally muted myself.
Yeah, so if you took that last comment over, please.
Yeah, I'm really curious about this one because, if we continue to do the same thing, we end up getting the same results, and this would be an opportunity to, maybe open up opportunities where they don't exist today and target specific funds towards specific projects where we're not having maybe as much success. So it looks like we would have to build in capacity to work in an option like this. But I think it might be worth knowing if that extra effort would be worth it if we could, for example, offer development funds to developers who would not be able to compete with the other two options. And therefore, you may have more small or minority-owned businesses, developers being able to participate. I'd like to maybe between now and the time that we make a decision, look further into this third option.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Chambliss, and maybe this is an item we can talk about at the Housing Policy Work Group meetings, and we can get further into the details of it. But I think, I think everything's worth considering. And, I think of when we award most of our project-based vouchers, they're going to tax credit developments. And so in a sense, those project-based vouchers are just deepening the subsidy for those units. And there's not as much opportunity to get into, for example, market rate units with our vouchers. So I think about, should we be partnering with cities that offer some sort of public financing? And as a caveat, the city requires that the developer award some project-based vouchers, for example. And so, I mean, the sky's the limit in terms of getting creative on how we offer an award. It really comes down to capacity. And with work plan items, where do you want to put your capacity?
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councilmember. Ms. Smith, that just prompts a question in my mind. So if we talk about, we had the 200 project-based vouchers we offered through RFP in 2020, 85 of them were awarded to projects that received full funding. But if we're talking about that option or the option of awarding directly to projects that were selected based on a previous competitive process, does that limit us only to cities that are within our HRA, or is it possible to use these strategies metro-wide?
That's a good question, Mr. Chair. I'm going to show you some maps and a couple of slides that show the placement of where project-based vouchers are, and most are in our service area, but we do have the ability to award project-based vouchers in some of the smaller communities that just don't have the volume of vouchers to project-based.
I look forward to seeing the maps. Thanks, Ms. Smith. Any other questions at this point, or?
Mr. Chair?
Yeah. Who is that? Ms. Councilmember Cummings?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Please.
I'm looking back on the slide number 3, the tenant-based versus project-based. Given how challenging it is to find landlords who are willing to accept the vouchers, let's say that we have an individual who's in a project-based voucher and really has been there a year and could move out and move on. Are we actually encouraging that individual to continue to stay where they perhaps don't need the services and perhaps are occupying a unit that could then be offered to someone else who could be using that voucher in that unit with those supportive services, because it's so hard then to transition into finding a place outside of the project base? Am I missing something there?
No, Mr. Chair and Councilmember Chambliss or Councilmember Cummings, it's a really good question, and I can use our own Family Affordable Housing Program as an example. So we have 150 units that have project-based vouchers. People give notice to move all the time, and it's real tough out there. And actually, this is common across our program. People give notice to move, they get issued a voucher to move, and then they can't find a place to move with their voucher. and either our council-owned housing units, a lot of times we let them stay, but in many cases, the unit has been re-rented and a new family is moving in 2 weeks or something. And we try to shuffle things around, but it becomes real tough. So we do have conversations with families when they give notice to move that, do you know where you're going to move to? Have you already been looking for a place? Have you found a landlord willing to accept the voucher? Because those are real questions that families need to think about, particularly in this market. So I don't think there's a good answer for it, but we do try to educate families and work with them on, finding a new place to live. We might, if someone's voucher is about ready to expire, there are many times when we connect them with our housing outreach coordinator that works on housing search assistance for hard to house families. So that's sometimes a solution too.
Follow up, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, please.
Okay. If the individual or the family or whatever has not given notice, but could, because they would qualify, perhaps they don't need the services anymore, they whatever, does it encourage them just to stay planted where they are, which then denies someone who could be using, are they still receiving the services? But then it denies the services that might be more appropriate for a new entry into a project-based voucher unit.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Cummings, that's absolutely a reality. And as long as they're taking that slot in that building, and if they don't move for whatever reason, that's one less person that can access that supportive housing unit. But you may recall last year we adopted a preference on our waiting list called the move up preference, where we were giving vouchers to families who no longer needed the services. So give them a voucher to move, opening a permanent supportive housing unit for somebody else. And it's a tenant choice. They're not, if they move, they're no longer receiving the services. But if they remain, they're sort of taking up that slot.
Right. It's a balancing act. Wow. It's really tricky. Thank you for that answer.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah,
I have a question.
Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Terry, as we're looking at these three options, but just Terry and I had a conversation earlier today. Could you explain, and I know the answer and I'm sure others do too, but I think as we were talking today, we've got a lengthy list of worthy families on our housing choice voucher program that's not project-based. And then we have project-based vouchers out there, but do the people that are being selected for project-based vouchers come off of the longer waiting list, or is it a different system by which they can get into those units?
Mr. Chair and Member Johnson, the project-based voucher units that are considered general occupancy, so there are no special requirements other than they need to be an eligible low-income household in order to live there. We do market those to waiting list applicants. And so most of those come from the waiting list. For projects that have supportive service components, particularly for people experiencing homelessness or living with disabilities. And I'll use the example I used with Councilmember Johnson today. We have a project that has project-based vouchers, and it serves women with brain injuries. And so it doesn't make sense to send a letter or contact 1,900 people on our waiting list to see if there is a woman with a brain injury that's interested in this one vacancy that happens to be in Minnetonka, for example, because we're spending so much time, administrative time, contacting the waiting list for units that people really weren't eligible for. So that's when we changed our policy and our administrative plan to allow direct referrals from either coordinated entry or service providers for these specialized units that have, these certain components. And so I have a slide in a few slides that shows the program admissions from the waiting list and for some of these special purpose vouchers to sort of illustrate that point.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Terry.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any other questions at this point for Ms. Smith? Otherwise, we can move on. Ms. Smith, please.
Okay. Next slide, please. So this slide is showing all the project-based voucher offer and award history. So all the vouchers that have been awarded since the beginning of time when we started project basing. So it's 970 total PBVs have been awarded. And the first one was way back in 1993, up to our current year of 2020. And you will see that we've skipped some years in between, but we've offered and awarded several project-based vouchers since 2014. So every year for the last 7 years. The high bars in here, so you can see in 2009, there was a large number awarded. That was the year that we awarded project-based vouchers to all the family affordable housing program units. So that was 150 vouchers. And we got extra vouchers from HUD for that. The second high bar in 2015, where we awarded 180 vouchers, that was a large opt-out. And an opt-out is a project that has a long-term contract directly with HUD, and they say, I'm out, we don't want to do this subsidy contract anymore. So HUD steps in and says, hey, Housing Authority, this development is no longer going to be affordable. If we give you some vouchers, will you assist the current residents? That's what an opt-out is. And that's what happened in 2015. And again in 2018, we had an opt-out. So we got additional vouchers, and then we also, Carver County converted some of their public housing units to Section 8, so we got additional vouchers for that. So those are the three largest bars that you see, and those were sort of anomaly years. And in 2020 is the next highest number of project-based vouchers we've ever awarded in a given year. And that was last year when we awarded the 85 vouchers. And when we did that, we also it was also the largest number of project-based vouchers awarded to one developer. So Beacon Interfaith Housing received 60 out of those 85 project-based vouchers in 2020. And that was unique for that year. And the reason for that was they scored incredibly high because they have solid supportive service components in them. They're serving specialized populations, people experiencing homelessness, and people living with disabilities. And so it was unique, and they were good projects, so they got the awards. But my point is, we've kind of been all over the place in terms of when we offer, how we offer, and there are some other unique circumstances in this chart, but it sort of gives you an idea that my point in this is we've offered the last 5 years, and it takes a lot of administrative capacity to bring these projects on, get the buildings filled for the first time, et cetera. And I'll get into that in a couple of slides. Next slide, please. So next, I'm going to show you a series of maps of project-based vouchers, and then I'm going to show you one of housing choice vouchers as well. But this is a map that shows all the project-based vouchers where we have contracts. It includes the 150 family affordable housing project-based voucher units. It includes, we shouldn't use these acronyms, but RAD, project-based units. Those are the Carver County units that were converted from public housing to Section 8, where we got a chunk of vouchers from HUD to make that happen. But it also includes, all 55 developments where we have vouchers. So you can sort of see where they are within the region. The gray areas are outside of Metro HRA's regular service area for the Housing Choice Voucher Program. And you will notice that we do have some project-based vouchers. We have some family affordable housing program units in Plymouth. We have some in Richfield. We have some right on the edge of St. Paul and Minneapolis. And we have some in Washington County. And those are smaller housing authorities that only have, well, some of them have 300 vouchers. Washington County, for example, only has, I think, 120. So they don't have any turnover vouchers to project-based. So we've gone into some of the other service areas with project-based voucher awards. Next slide, please. So this is just a closer look at the 150 council-owned family affordable housing units. So sort of just to zoom in without all the other business in there, but you can see These are scattered throughout Anoka, Hennepin, and Ramsey, suburban Ramsey counties. Next slide, please. And this is a busy map, but it includes all housing choice vouchers and all tenant-based programs. So these are the vouchers that are connected to the tenants. And you can see there's, larger concentrations right around the core. And as you go out a little further, the vouchers get a little bit more dispersed. But this also includes, you'll see lots of dots in Minneapolis and St. Paul and Bloomington, for example. The Metro HRA doesn't typically serve tenant-based vouchers in those areas, but there are several boutique type programs that serve specialized populations that we administer that none of the other housing authorities do, like housing opportunities for persons with AIDS. That's a federal program that provides rent subsidy to people living with HIV positive. Minneapolis and St. Paul don't operate that program, so we do that program in the full 7-county area, for example. Bridges is another one where it's a state-funded program that serves people with persistent and serious mental illness, and we again serve much of the region for that program. So that's what those extra dots are.
Excuse me, Chair Lilligren, Councilmember Vento has a question.
Thank you, Michelle. Councilmember Vento.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Terry, you've maybe provided this information before, and if you have and I'm blanking, I apologize. But by chance, would it be possible to get information about both of these programs in Washington, Dakota, and Scott County? I'm just curious as to, I don't have entities in Dakota or Scott, but I do in Washington County, and I'm just curious as to what they're doing in their respective areas.
So, Mr. Chair and Councilmember Vento, I'm not certain I understand the question, but you're wondering which programs we operate in other service areas and what they are?
No, I'm wondering what they are offering, what they have available in terms of these programs, the project-based vouchers or the tenant-based vouchers, the tenant-based assistance.
It's a good question, and I think that I'm hesitating because there's no easy way to answer that other than, Washington County does have a Bridges program. They have a state-funded Bridges program that serves that population. They do not have project-based vouchers because they don't have enough vouchers to project-based. So I can try to gather some information. It gets kind of complicated really quickly, but I'll try to figure out what resources might be out there and see
Terry,
what I can get you.
Thank you. I can also request that. That's not a problem. I was just curious as to whether or not there was anything handy that would provide that information.
Yeah, I think it's realistic, Mr. Chair, excuse me, and Councilmember Vento. I think all these communities have localized programs that serve their communities that are, different than what we have, but I don't know offhand exactly what those are, but I'll see what I can get you.
Thanks.
Mr. Chair.
Councilmember Johnson.
And not to jump in inappropriately. I just think too, though, Plymouth has an HRA, and I know that they're always thrilled when people come in and want to learn more and explain their programs. And we're very lucky in Plymouth that Metro HRA has stepped in and partnered on some things. But just reaching out to them, they're so thrilled when people want to learn more and be helpful. And so I just encourage, if you've got an HRA in your district somewhere, it's probably worth a point in time just saying hello and having a nice conversation with them.
Oh, excuse me. Just a little sneeze.
Bless you. Thanks, Councilmember.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments at this point, or Ms. Smith?
Mr. Chair, just briefly on this slide.
Yeah.
Terry, again, I think it was at an earlier slide, but how many people does this represent on this program within, again, the number of people being, or families or households being served?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Johnson, this is a representation of 5,900 families. Okay, next slide, please. And then this chart or this slide is just showing you a comparison of where tenant-based voucher holders live, so the housing choice vouchers, and where the project-based voucher units are. Now, of course, we have a whole lot more tenant-based vouchers, so the map's a lot busier, but you get the idea of where the concentrations of units are. And a lot of that has to do on the tenant-based side is where rental units are actually located. You know, we have a large number of families living in Brooklyn Park, but there's also a very large number of rental units in that community compared to some other communities within the region. So it just gives you a full picture look at where households are living. Next slide, please. So this is slide is attempting to show you what our new admissions have looked like in the last year. And to sort of set the stage, as I indicated, we have 6,872 vouchers, and we have about 750 of them that turn over every year. So about 11% of our program turns over every year. And that's the only way these project-based vouchers get awarded, and the only way we serve people on our waiting list is through these turnover vouchers. Over the last 2 years, this slide is showing you program admissions over the last 2 years. So in 2019, and I'll explain why the math doesn't add up in a few seconds, but in 2019, we had 164 program admissions. These represent either filling project-based voucher buildings projects for the first time, so people moving in for the first time, or project-based movers. So they lived in a project-based unit and they took a voucher to move to another location. And in those cases, they, you know, take one of the vouchers. And I sort of say project-based movers carry sort of a tail, because we're giving a voucher to the family to move, but then we're also filling the unit again. And then someone else moves in and we're giving a voucher to move, and then we're filling the unit again. So they sort of carry a tail. So in 2019, we had 164 of our turnover vouchers go to fill project-based units or to project-based movers. The green box are waiting list admissions. So these are housing choice voucher applicants that actually came from the waiting list. And when we came from the waiting list or some other source in our big bucket, you know, of project-based vouchers. And then the gray box are these special purpose vouchers. And when we talk about special purpose vouchers, they're special allocations of vouchers that we get from HUD that serve a specified purpose. For example, the mainstream vouchers, those are we have 203 of them. They were awarded in 2019 and 2020, which is why there were so many slots filled in that period of time. And that's the partnership with the Metro Transit Homeless Action Team, where those vouchers have gone. Now, they're new allocations of vouchers, so we got extra vouchers for those, but now in future years, as those turnover, we'll fill those slots. But it's the Family Unification Program, which is a child protection program where we're working with the child protection system to reunify families, and then our Veterans Affairs vouchers that get filled through referral from the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. And so my point in illustrating this slide is in 2019 and in 2020, only 85 of our program admissions came from the waiting list. And in 2020, only 136 of them. And that's sort of flipped from the past. We used to have many more waiting list admissions and not as many project-based voucher admissions. But as time goes on and we get more project-based vouchers, that program is taking up more of our turnover vouchers. You can also see that this doesn't add up, right? We have 750 vouchers turnover every year, and you can see that these numbers each year don't add up to 750. One other way that we fill those turnover slots are through program admissions of people that are living in our service area where another housing authority owns the voucher. So for example, someone gets their voucher in Minneapolis, they want to move, they move to Columbia Heights, which is in our service area. When they arrive at our service area, we turn around and send a bill to Minneapolis for that person. They still own the voucher and we bill them. there's a lot of administrative work that goes into these billing arrangements. So instead of billing, what we can do is absorb those vouchers into our own program, and they become one of ours and take one of our 1,750 slots. And the only reason we do those absorbs, and it makes up a lot, it takes up a lot of our turnover vouchers. The billing is incredibly burdensome. We have, right now we have 700 families living in our service area where their voucher belongs to somebody else. So we're billing hundreds of housing authorities across the country. We might be billing Georgia for 1, we might be billing Chicago for 20, we might be billing North Dakota for 3. And so you see these billing arrangements, and then they pay the wrong amount. So we have to do these reconciliations. So in order to balance those administrative functions, we use some of our turnover vouchers to get rid of that billing piece. So, but it's the only reason we do that. We don't want to take up our vouchers by doing that, but it's the way the federal rules work. So I'm happy to take questions on this slide, but to me, it's about balancing the admissions. One more thing I'll say, Mr. Chair, and then I'll answer questions on this slide, is we opened our waiting list in 2019, you will recall, and we got 17,400 applications in a week. We did a random drawing, and we placed 2,000 households on the waiting list. We still have 1,900 on that list. And that's because we had a voucher freeze because we were in the shortfall status, and then all the turnover vouchers, or many of them, were going to these project-based, filling the project-based units, or those project-based movers that take a voucher to move. So we have this waiting list. We hardly have touched it, and we don't want to get into a position where all of our turnover vouchers are going to project-based units, and God forbid somebody has to become homeless before they can even get a voucher. And so that's what I'm trying to illustrate on this slide. I'm happy to answer any questions on this slide, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Ms. Smith. Questions on this slide?
Mr. Chair. Oh.
Yeah, Councilmember Chambliss.
Yeah, I was just curious if the project-based vouchers are getting more popular with tenants due to their size and increased number of bedrooms.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Chambliss, I'm not sure. They certainly are. We give extra points for project-based vouchers that have 3 or more bedrooms. And so projects that have tended to get the vouchers at least have a portion of those larger units. I think more the numbers are associated with, we've gone 7 years with awarding project-based vouchers, and all of those buildings are coming online. We might be filling 50 units at a time. And if they're general occupancy, they are taking our turnover vouchers. And the more project-based vouchers we get, the more potential we have for people taking those tenant-based vouchers to move, which takes a turnover voucher. So having the availability of the large bedrooms, I think, is impactful. But I think there are so many different factors that influence it. But you're right in that the larger bedrooms are harder to find for families.
So I'm wondering if that's like a niche for the developers and they're creating more opportunities. I'm not sure, but I know there are a lot more new affordable housing developments popping up with 2-3 bedroom options as well. So,
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Chambliss, it would be easy enough for us to do some analysis on bedroom sizes between the housing choice voucher holders and the project-based vouchers in terms of which bedroom sizes they're living in. We get a monthly report that shows that. I just don't know it right off the top of my head. And if that would be helpful, I could certainly provide that.
No, I mean, it's if you think it would be helpful, that's fine. Some of it, I think, is based on opportunity too, and if the opportunity is there and they find out about it. Sometimes I think, as a person who, when I was younger, rented a lot, I didn't know where the units were. And a lot of times I think that was intentional because the property owners wanted certain types of tenants, and they got tenants through word of mouth and things like that. So I think some of that still happens today. You know, you have Google, so it might be a little bit easier to find out where the rental units are, but that's something maybe in the housing group we can look at too.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Chambliss, it's incredibly complicated, and I'm on a work group that's working on, excuse me, unsheltered homelessness. And one of the challenges our meetings have been focusing on the system issues and how navigating the system is near impossible for families. Particularly, it's different in Hennepin County than it is in Ramsey County, than it is in Anoka and Carver County, and trying to navigate the system and find the resources is near impossible. It's a real issue.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you. Committee members, any other questions or
Mr.
comments
Chair?
on this slide? Yeah, Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Terry, you know, because we've kind of flipped on the housing choice vouchers versus the project-based vouchers over the years, is this also in recognition of the fact that we're just losing that naturally occurring affordable housing where the landlords or owners, you know, might have been participating in previous years in this program, but, you know, with the market the way it has been over several years and investors coming in and flipping, you know, apartment buildings and unfortunately displacing people and not being part of the program, are we seeing that impact? Because we are losing affordable housing units across the state. There's a trend. And so I'm just making an assumption, but I'd like to hear, is that what's impacting the fact too, where people are just stuck and it's harder and harder and harder to find those units, and project-based vouchers are popping up because there's such a strong market for it. And also it was, you know, Met Council within the last year, and I'm thrilled about this, but we decided to, you know, with our scoring, add points for those 3 and 4 bedroom units to help advance those, because we saw those as a priority for families in need. But Terry, is that part of the dynamic, or is there something else going on where the numbers have essentially kind of flipped on us?
Councilmember Johnson and Mr. Chair, I think you raise a lot of good points. The, you know, loss of, for example, naturally occurring affordable housing just reduces the number of units available to families because they have affordable rents and the vouchers will qualify. So I think that's a separate issue on its own, that families are having increasing challenges on finding a unit to use their voucher in. And our current success rate of families that get vouchers that are able to use them, and these are the housing choice vouchers, we're at 62%. And so that means 38% come back unused and go to the next person on the waiting list. And that's been the case for several years since the market, you know, tanked and the vacancy rates are so low. And so I think it has a lot to do with that, and that's about success rates. I think the word on the street of the project-based voucher program, or the project-based vouchers, are in much higher demand than I've seen ever. I used to maybe get 1 or 2 calls from a developer a year that wants project-based vouchers, and they'd maybe find out about it through the Minnesota Housing Consolidated RFP. But I have 15 emails in the last month from developers that want project-based vouchers, because they know going into the Minnesota Housing's RFP process, they will get some additional points for having those vouchers in place. And, you know, there's some complication to that, because Minnesota Housing is going to award this many tax credits in a given year. And although we may be able to influence who gets those tax credits a little bit by giving the vouchers ahead of time, it doesn't work in all cases. And last year was a good example of that, where we had several developments that we gave them the, you know, preliminary project-based vouchers, but they didn't get their financing. So then they didn't get their vouchers. So it's sort of this cat and mouse game. And it's a complicated system, but I think these numbers are just really a reflection of the number of project-based vouchers we've awarded and brought online in the last, you know, 6-7 years, and it's catching up.
Thank you. Further comments or questions on this slide?
Mr. Chair, I don't know if you can see me.
Sorry, I can't. Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we've had a lot of initiatives in the past several years on trying to make a better success rate for people with the not project-based, the tenant-based vouchers being successful in finding a unit, recruiting more landlords, changing to the zip code payment standards, having the HRA people help find places. How much of that has been disrupted with COVID, and is there any difference being made with those choices?
So, Mr. Chair and Councilmember Wolf, you bring up a really good point. And our success rate, for the percentage of voucher holders that got vouchers that were able to use them in 2010 and prior, for 10 years prior to that too, were 80, 85, 90%. So, the majority of people that got vouchers were able to use them. Then in 2011, when the vacancy rates dropped and rents skyrocketed, in 2014, our success rate dropped to 45%. That means 55% were coming back unused. And then, there are so many things that impact success rates, but we hired a program ombudsman to foster tenant-landlord relationships, to do active landlord recruitment with our outreach team, to do housing search assistance for hard-to-house voucher families, and that would mean families whose voucher is about to expire, or maybe they have some challenges in their background that make it more difficult for them to place their voucher. But our capacity is very limited in that. I mean, we have one person that helps with housing search, and it's a time-intensive process. We have an outreach team, but they're also working, with the homeless action team and getting people that have the mainstream vouchers housed, working with family unification families. And so capacity is an issue. And the number of landlords that we have has decreased, but that's hard to measure because maybe it's because the number of landlords is based on tax ID. I'm getting down a rabbit hole now. I don't know why that's relevant. Or the number of it's just hard to measure. So how are these specific actions that we're taking, like the housing search assistance with our outreach team member? We know it's making a difference because they referred 700 units to families in 2020. But in COVID, they would physically go out and show people units, pick them up, take them to where they need to be. And we didn't do that. But, our outreach team, as they talk about it, they feel like tenants have been more empowered to take responsibility for some of their own things. They'd have to get themselves to the showing. They'd have to do a virtual tour of an apartment building. But it'd be tragic to see where success rates would be without those services. But, it's hard to quantify.
Mr. Chair, can I follow up?
Yeah, please, Councilmember Wolf.
It sounds like from a capacity standpoint, we're fighting between staff capacity to fill up the project-based versus help people find their space in the tenant-based one. But the project-based, you 100% can fill it.
Mm-hmm.
Where tenant-based, you sometimes lose people.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Wolf, that's accurate. When Lisa and I have been talking about capacity and, trying to think about some of the initiatives that we have coming up in 2021, like the mobility demonstration program and the moving to work program, and looking at a home ownership option, and all of those initiatives take capacity. And so where do we want to spend that capacity, and where do we want to focus our initiatives? And, if we get the moving to work program, that's going to take a lot of capacity to get that program up and off the ground. Same with the mobility program. And so it's, sort of, Greg, if you want to move to the next slide, we're kind of getting at these discussion points, but you're absolutely right. Councilmember Wolf, it's all these pulling competing demands on our time, and there's just not enough time in the day and not enough money to hire enough staff to we'd like to do housing search assistance for all 7,000 families, just don't have the capacity to do it.
Excuse me, Chair Lilligren.
Yeah.
Councilmember Cummings had a question, and then I see
thanks.
Councilmember Chambliss has her hand up.
Great, Councilmember Cummings and Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're so lucky, Terry, to have you with not such a crowded agenda that we can get this big picture and all these questions answered. I know that the state was making great progress in finding housing for veterans, and I'm just wondering where we stand on that at this point in time.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Cummings, I'm on a group that meets monthly about bringing an end to homelessness among veterans. And I can't remember the numbers. I might have to get back to you. There are, I want to say maybe 200 veterans still on those lists, but I'll find that answer and follow up with you because I can't remember off the top of my head. But we have, the Metro HRA has 157 veteran vouchers. So that we're a partnership with the VA. VA does referral and support services, and then we provide the rent subsidy. And we have 157 of them, and we can't quite get full. We issue vouchers, and then we do housing search assistance and getting people housed and then keeping people housed. In some cases, people require intense services. In some cases, there aren't many services needed, but it's a successful program, but it's one of the hardest populations to find housing for. And again, I think it comes down to a capacity issue. But
thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions for Ms. Smith at this point?
This is Councilmember Chambliss, but I'll defer.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, that's all right. Councilmember Chambliss,
Yeah,
you're right.
that's okay. I'll just defer because I think it might get answered in the next slide.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember. Ms. Smith.
thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is sort of the considerations, and part of it, sort of thinking through the trade-offs of offering and awarding project-based vouchers, or maybe taking a year off or 2 years off. And for offering PBVs, the arguments are it's a tool that developers can use to obtain financing points for other public financing. And we've talked about that. It may help get a project over the edge, but it may not. And, if we're looking at tax credits, Minnesota Housing is going to award the same amount of tax credits, whether we have project-based vouchers or not. What the vouchers help is to help with that deeper subsidy for families that want to access those units. So it can provide a deeper affordability level. Again, it may help get a project off the ground that may not otherwise get off the ground. And again, we saw that last year with some projects that we awarded preliminary PBVs to, and they didn't get the financing even with those points. So I think it's just a demonstration of the incredible competition there is for all the resources for affordable housing and development, not only, with Minnesota Housing and other funding partners. It gets permanent units and additional locations throughout the region. So, and I think, the council can influence policy preferences for placement. So last year, the project-based vouchers that got awarded were for supportive service developments that were scattered throughout the region, but all of them that were awarded were serving some sort of specialized population, people experiencing homelessness, people living with disabilities, and they had supportive service connections, which we know is a tremendous need within our communities. In terms of reasons not to offer project-based vouchers this year or next year, is balancing the waiting list admissions with the non-waiting list admissions. Again, we have the brand new waiting list. We've hardly touched it. People are waiting years and years to get on waiting lists, then they wait years and years to get their voucher. And so if we did not offer PBVs this year, it could be an opportunity to serve some of those broader waiting list households. It's administrative burdensome to offer award and bring online. We talked about some of this. We talk about leasing the buildings to begin with, but an incredible administrative lift on the front end for getting environmental reviews completed and subsidy layering reviews. And in some cases, we are monitoring wage rates for a development if it's above a certain number of units. So it's incredibly time intensive on the front end. And then, when we're getting ready to fill the buildings, it can be incredibly time intensive. And then we talked about the tail. After living in a project-based voucher unit for a year, households can request a tenant-based voucher to move. And I don't know what that threshold is. It's hard to know, but the more project-based vouchers we get, the more of our turnover vouchers are going to those PBV movers. And then again, it would allow, a year of waiting list admissions. Next slide, please. So here are the questions before you. And again, today's item is information. I wanted to have some discussion with you all, depending on how the discussion on this slide goes. We may be back for future action, depending on the direction that's taken. But, the question becomes, how often should the council's HRA offer and award project-based vouchers? Is it every year like we've been doing? I'm not sure that is sustainable from a staffing capacity point. Every other year, or is it every third year? But having some sort of timeline in place so that developers know when they can expect us to be offering project-based vouchers might be nice. And then, how should we offer them? Should we offer through Minnesota Housing's RFP? Should we issue our own RFP? Should we award to projects that have already been through a competition of other public financing? So how to award becomes a decision point too. So I pose those questions, Mr. Chair, and I'm open to hearing thoughts and comments.
Thank you, Ms. Smith, very much for your work on this and for explaining this very complicated system to us. And, I guess I have one question, and then I'd certainly turn to other committee members for comments or questions. But earlier, I think it was in 2020 when we offered, I think it was 200 project-based vouchers and early to projects as separate from the Minnesota Housing RFP. And then 75 of those units, project-based vouchers, were actually used. How much analysis do we have on that? Were all 200 awarded, but only 75 made it over the line? Or yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
The rest of the developments that did not get the formal award of project-based vouchers last year, they didn't get their necessary financing. And so they applied for tax credits and didn't get them. So the project then became not financially feasible. And so we did not formally award the vouchers. And so that was the case with all 115 that did not get the formal award. They didn't get their financing.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. Committee members, questions,
Mr.
comments? First, Councilmember Johnson, then Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to the point you just made, Mr. Chair, that's where the difficulty is for these really great projects that are trying to come through the system, right? Because it is incredibly difficult to line up all the funding partners and the timing of the funding and the cycles of the applications, because in our case, we had a deadline that said you have to have all of your funding by December 31st. If not, those vouchers need to go back because we don't want to shelve them for an indefinite amount of time, which makes sense. But I would also say, it's challenging because we went through that whole process to not come back and try to, keep some of that momentum going also feels a bit defeating because those projects will keep moving along. So it'd be nice for them to be able to come back into our cycle within a year and, hopefully maintain the momentum that they've got until all of their other funding gaps are filled. And as Terry mentioned, having kind of that nod from Met Councils at Metro HRA that those vouchers would go to them pending full funding does help them with scoring along the way. And even though they didn't get their full funding, just getting to that point is helping secure funding through the cycle. So I'm really conflicted on this. I'm going to pivot for a minute back to the tenant-based vouchers. It would be just super important to be able to understand in the marketplace at given points in time how many units are available that aren't filled when comparing that to the long list of people that are waiting to find units. Now, granted, just because a unit is available, there's choice in that. The person might not want to live in that specific unit, but it's a market problem that we have. We have greater demand, and so many of those vouchers are also circulating for a period of time where they can't find a unit and they go back into the pool. So I'm just trying to understand the dynamic between where to place your bets on how can we help projects that are going to come through and are going to house families and are going to have sufficient services and adequate numbers of bedrooms, to get people housed. And yep, it's true that the project-based vouchers have tails, but at the same time, when a project opens up because somebody's moving and trying to either moving out of it, they're up and out and they're on their own and in market now, or moving to some other affordable place. But it does open up certainty that somebody's going to get that unit because it's dedicated. It's a project that's dedicated, and is ready to go. There's not a lot of waiting. And then my only other, thought on this is just kind of the two different systems by which we get people into the project-based vouchers. I mean, it would be just super great if we could, and I know we market them to the waiting list of 2,000 people, but it'd be nice if those two systems could be integrated so that you could both guarantee that projects coming through the pipeline would have some certainty that they'd get their vouchers. And then those units would be then made available first to the people that have been waiting for so long, because that's where it just feels, unfair. But at the same time, the demand is so high that it almost feels like any way we can get them is really a prudent way to go. The other thing that I do want to learn more about that third option of how we could possibly do this, but at the same time, we have pipeline of really worthy projects that just haven't crossed the mark where they're fully funded or near funded or ready to break ground. But those projects in pipeline are very important that we work as a housing system of stakeholders to keep them alive. So many times in my 20 years of doing this, and you all know, and talking to the developers, those projects are on life support many times during their cycle of trying to get that thing across the finish line. And I shared this with Terry today, but one of my frustrations is when I hear people say, oh, certain communities in the metro don't want to do it, they can't get it approved, we need more affordable projects. Well, you know what? There are projects that have been approved. There are projects that have been green-lighted politically. There are projects across the entire metro region that are trying to get their funding through, but Minnesota housing is limited. We're all limited. So I guess all I'm trying to say is before we pivot into a new system of trying to put the limited amount of vouchers we have somewhere, I think within the system that we have that we used this past year, we can still direct and try to support where we want those vouchers to go so that we get the best return on that investment for the clients who need it, which in some ways I believe would be similar to option 3 without all the extra burdensome administrative services and resources. So I think that's a longer play if we can refine that, but I don't want to abandon what we have going now because, even if we don't come back for this for a couple years or 2 to 3 years, man, there are just projects that are just dying to get these types of vouchers on their sheets, their balance sheets or their score sheets or the whatever sheets. And so I really understand the difficulties we have administratively trying to manage all of this, but we have vouchers sitting on shelves anyways because we can't find them placed. So in one sense, I'd like to get them placed sooner rather than later, one way or another, because any voucher that's going unused or we don't get into a project is a family that's not being served. And to the point that was made earlier about more, the need is greater for the 3 or 4 bedrooms, you're seeing a lot more of those now. And they're coming from these developers that are very good at what they do. And they know where the markets are. They know where people want to live. And they provide safe, communities with the supportive services that are needed. So after all of this, I want to, just like everybody is just get everybody on the 2,000 person list, serviced. But until we create more units, broad scale, more affordable housing units, and get the market demand corrected or the market problem corrected, I'm gonna be one that probably leans more to the project-based vouchers, because at least we know we'll get those in ground, and you've got really good developers coming around that. And, we can encourage some of our other goals within that system, I believe. So I'm just really putting that out there. I'm very passionate about this. The need is so great. Terry's done such great work. Our team is great. HAT team is great. But we really do have to decide, how are we going to continue to really put a lot of pressure and steam behind this to continue to get whatever vouchers we have into the hands of the marketplace. So thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Councilmember. And I have in queue Councilmember Wolf and Councilmember Chambliss. Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've been kind of going back and forth as I think about this as the discussion goes, but having done so many project-based vouchers in the last several years, I would be okay with taking a year off to concentrate on our list and get some people off of the list that have been sitting there. I mean, the idea was that we would go through a list in 3 years or so it would stay reasonably fresh, but we're, now several years into the list and we've hardly touched it. So, letting those other initiatives that we've been working on play out, helping people getting into 2 units and working on our existing list, I think is an acceptable thing to do. And then next year, do the project-based again. But I'm also intrigued by what Riva was saying earlier about looking at a different way of offering those project-based vouchers so that we can maybe get some non-traditional applicants. It's worth looking into, and if we took a year off, that gives us time to look at the idea and think about what would be the best way to do that. That's my thought.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Chambliss.
Yeah, this has been really good, helpful information. It's good to understand the complexity of the issues as well. No matter what we do, the demand by tenants to find housing, whether it's through project-based vouchers, tenant-based, or the project-based vouchers for the homes. I'm kind of leaning towards doing, maybe some type of hybrid, just so that we can explore, what that third option might look like. And I think we need to utilize our housing partners that have a lot of experience with the issues to kind of guide us to what some of the systemic problems are. And as a council and an entity that supports housing, maybe we can advocate to work on some of those systemic issues that are known and are not really helping the developers. It's not really helping the tenants as much as it could. So we all play a part on that. Met Council plays a small part with the vouchers, whether it's tenant or project based. And but we can strategize and partner to impact the whole, the whole housing ecosystem. So I would advocate for that as well. It's just hard to see so many people, from 17,000 applicants to 2,000 actually getting awarded. We should do our best to help those folks out. So I'm kind of agreeing, I'm agreeing with Wendy on that as well. We need to do our part to get people into homes as quickly as possible. We need to advocate for maybe more capacity at Met Council, but maybe not. Maybe we're not equipped to expand further than we are. Maybe we could support other entities that are equipped to handle it. But I think definitely dealing with the systemic issues that are creating the bottlenecks for success is going to get us the greater movement into housing. So that's kind of my thinking.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion on these questions, Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with everything that has been said, and I think there's some really important points that are being made, but I think that I also have, Terry, your knowledge of the complexity of what we are able to do and what we are doing is truly amazing. And I would have total faith and trust in you in helping us understand what capacity we have to make whatever decision is made be a success, because we can have lots of programs, lots of projects, lots of ideas, lots of initiatives, but if we don't have the capacity to support them and make them successful, then that makes that worthless, or not worthless, but not worth what it could be. I think we have to be able to support the decisions that we make as well, which makes me also wonder about, I like the idea of looking further into the third option, but I'm wondering too, if by taking a year off, also this has been a year of turmoil that has been unique and hopefully, and is going to unfold for quite some time and may make situations worse. So I wonder if we took a year to reassess and for you to be able to work with the housing work group and all the other entities and judge capacity within the council so that we can be the most successful with whatever we choose to do. I think that that is also a really, really important part of the equation, the third leg of the stool as well. So anyway, thank you. This has just been an incredible discussion and I really appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Vento.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to second what everybody said. And I think the idea of having a year to look at this is really valuable in terms of looking backward and looking forward, both, and figuring out what we're doing well and want to continue doing. And I would ask that the housing work group, to the extent that this doesn't make it too insurmountable, as you hand out materials or share materials or have notes from your meetings, if you could share them with the rest of us on this committee, I would really appreciate it so that I can kind of stay up to speed with what you're looking at. It'll help inform me for future meetings. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember. Ms. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to sort of clarify something. So on the slide where we had the three buckets, one was sort of going, issuing or offering project-based vouchers through Minnesota Housing's process, and that's sort of when we're in it. The second bucket was issue an RFP on our own, so that's sort of in advance of that process. And the third bucket would be awarding project-based vouchers to projects that got financing through a previous competition. And so then it's more of, we would be coming in on the back end to award project-based vouchers once, they already had their financing in place. Because, we wouldn't want to be in a position where we're awarding project-based vouchers that only have 20% of their financing, for example. So we would build contingencies into that process. So it's sort of, the first one is as part of the process. The middle one, I should have reordered these. The middle one is advance of the financing, and then the third one is sort of coming in on the back end. So I thought maybe that clarification might be a little helpful.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. That's very helpful. And now I can't see
Mr. Chair.
I got a quick, okay.
Councilmember Chambliss, please.
Yeah, so do we have to have people that have received full funding in 2020 for the middle section? I mean, what if they're almost there?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Chambliss, that's a question Councilmember Johnson asked me today too. And we wrote that into the RFP itself, because what we didn't want to do is award vouchers to a project that doesn't get their financing for 3-4 years down the line, and we don't know, what our vouchers will look like at that time. So shelving vouchers for that long, in my opinion, can be problematic. So that's why we put that deadline in there. It doesn't mean, that's exactly how it has to work. Councilmember Johnson had a suggestion today that maybe if we issue an RFP in the future, we could allow for extensions under certain circumstances. For example, for projects that were near the finish line but didn't quite make it. Because there's a couple of developments that are working on alternative funding structures now, and they've reached out to me and several of you because they still want the vouchers even though they didn't have their financing by the end of last year. And so we can, if we end up issuing an RFP independently in the future, we can talk about how that's worded, but that was written into the RFP.
Yeah, I think we should look at that because, you know, if a project is almost there, their success could mean, you know, either a dozen, 20, or hundreds of units. So I think we should give that some weight as well.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, Councilmember Johnson.
And thank you. You know, that was kind of the point I was trying to make earlier is that, you know, out of the 200 we had, 85 got their funding in by December, complete by December 31st. That means 111 vouchers that we thought were good projects didn't quite get there. To what extent, I don't know, but I believe some of them are probably closer than others. I also know, having done this through our HRA in Plymouth and seeing how this funding works and over the years, I'm just telling you guys that the fact that they were preliminarily and conditionally awarded project-based vouchers from us helped them score higher and continues to help them score higher with other funding sources. So they are very concerned, A, about losing the vouchers and having to reset and start all over again, but also jeopardizing potentially other funders because, you know, it's layering, it's stacking all that funding and all the different funding cycles and all the different deadlines that is just incredibly difficult to do. And that's why by the time you get to the ribbon cutting, it's an amazing amount of work and timing and everybody hanging in there with the funding and opportunities that they have that gets it across the finish line. It truly is. And that's why I do believe if we do our own RFP in the future, well, A, I just want to back it up. So we did this process this year. And Terry, if you could, Mr. Chair, if you'd let me, Terry, when did we actually award or make the, you know, notifications that these conditional vouchers would be available to these 194 or 196? When was, what time of year was that?
Mr. Chair, we issued the RFP, was it in April?
Yeah.
I can't remember what I did yesterday. At any rate, we awarded gave the preliminary awards prior to the Minnesota Housing Super RFP process. So they had the preliminary awards when those applications, well, initially they were due in June and then Minnesota Housing extended the application deadline to July.
And so, Mr. Chair, my point to that is they found out that they were conditionally awarded these, and then they had to have everything wrapped up and finished up and buttoned up by December 31st. That's a feat. So to the point that Riva was making, I think my point is, you know, these are pros that know what they're doing. And that's why 15 more in the last month have reached out to Terry because there's pressure in the housing system to get more of this out there and to get the tax credits and to get the bonding and to get all the local communities, whether it's county, city, whoever, feds, get that funding lined up. So I appreciate taking time off, but you know, there's stuff just about ready to go and in that pipeline that this is just so important to, and they will house families. Now, is it perfect? Should we be working on getting the people, the 2,000 people on the list housed? Yes, but the problem there is that we don't have enough units. The market is tough right now, man. The market is just not there. So, you know, these people wait for several years, 7 years in some cases, and then they're out there hunting for a unity. Even as Wendy mentioned, changing the zip code and sliding scales. I mean, we're still getting back a large percentage of those vouchers unused because the people can't find them. So here we have one body of work over here that's got pending need for vouchers and 111 that we said conditionally could have them. And they only got like 5 months to finish the rest of their funding. And they're all sitting there, you know, going, God, we need those. We want to keep those. How do we get back in the cycle? How do we extend the cycle? What do we do? It's not one or the other. It's going to be a both. But one area is pushing and can use those vouchers, and another area is having a hard time using them. So that means the housing system has to change, that we start producing more affordable units or getting incentives for those landlords. And we've talked about some of that in recent meetings where they opt into the system and we can open up some more of those market rate units. But that you need a sales force out there doing that. And that's where resources to get them to flip is is tough. And some of them, quite frankly, are just not big fans of the program. So I'm just saying that before, we back off of anything and try to think differently, the need is now. Families are waiting. Developments are trying to move forward. Developments have been approved, but they just are waiting for some of that gap funding and those gap resources. So I'm just really hoping that we don't back off of the 111 that, just a half a year ago, we said, yeah, this is good, get your funding. I'd really like to work with developers that are close and get those out into the marketplace. We intended to do it 7 months ago for 111 vouchers. I don't want to pull back on those. I just don't. I would like to continue to work and then at the same time, try to figure out how to get more market rate units and how to save the housing choice voucher units that we have, keep them in the game because we don't want to lose them either. But that's where I stand, and I'm going to be pretty vocal about it just because I don't want to back away from need. I want to lean into it, and I still want to solve all the other problems we need to solve as well.
Thank you, Councilmember. Ms. Smith, I do have a question just to really make it crystal clear, and I'm pretty sure I heard you correctly in that we all did as well. But earlier in your presentation, you talked about the impact of early award of project-based vouchers, the impact on us serving people, people who are on our list. And so I just want to make crystal clear, you were saying, a focus on early award of project-based vouchers is having a negative impact or at least delaying us getting through the folks on our list, correct?
So, Mr. Chair, the most recent awards and they were all awarded to supportive service projects. So when those eventually come online and the ones that are existing housing are already getting filled, but the new construction ones, won't be ready for 2 years. When they do come up, right, those will get filled from either coordinated entry or direct referral from the service providers. They won't be marketed to the waiting list. So those will not serve waiting list applicants. Is that what you're getting at, Mr. Chair?
Yep. Very helpful. Thanks, Ms. Smith. And sort of the way Councilmember Johnson was talking, I suspect that at the end of the day, this is sort of a both and question, right? But we're talking about housing inventory, housing stock. And, as we've seen the market come back from the downturn, of course, it's at the most profitable and that the largest investment is happening. And so here's our opportunity to have direct impact on the more affordable end of production. And so I agree, it's important for us to use what tools we have and what influence we have. And it seems like an award of project-based vouchers in advance of the Minnesota Housing, whatever it's called, Coordinated RFP, we have more ability to influence what's going to happen within subsidized affordable housing production. And I think that has value. I think what we might have learned from 2020 is that we haven't quite hit on the timing and things. And so, and I'm very intrigued with what Councilmember Wolf and Councilmember Chambliss were saying about sort of really targeting certain types of units, certain communities, maybe certain emerging developers. And to me, all of that takes time. We have some analysis here from what we learned in 2020 that we need to do. We need to have serious conversations about what kind of more focused efforts we may want to have in the future. And that takes time and that takes capacity. And so I don't know if we're getting a sense from this committee that taking that time, if that means a year or something, before we would RFP independently or in advance for more project-based vouchers, I think that's probably time well spent. Other comments or questions from committee members? Councilmember Lee had to depart. Thank you, Councilmember Lee, for being here.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, this Councilmember Chambliss, that if there is support that the council can provide in terms of additional capacity for staff so that the work can be done, we don't want to have a bottleneck in our own system. So maybe make a proposal about what is needed if we do whatever direction that we go. If it means that the capacity needs to be increased, we would need to look at that information as well, I think.
Thank you, Councilmember. Other comments or questions from council members? Ms. Smith, are you getting what you need from the committee today?
I think so, Mr. Chair. And just one more clarifying thing. Councilmember Johnson indicated that it would be a good idea to continue to work with the 115 that didn't get awarded, or 111, I guess it is, that didn't get awarded. And, you know, I think the way we worded the RFP, I'm not sure that's an option at this point, because we required in the written RFP that projects had to have their financing in order by the end of 2020 in order to be considered for a formal PBV award. I do think, you know, going forward, if we decide to go that route again, we can reword that into the future if that's what we decide. But generally what I'm hearing from the majority of you is that it makes sense to take a year off, analyze our options, think about capacity, and think about have some conversation with the housing work group about how to offer an award in the future, and think of alternative ways that could work.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Councilmember Johnson.
And to just acknowledge what Terry said, I agree, Terry. There, you know, we can't just continue on with the 111. I think what I maybe didn't clarify, because you're right. I mean, that ship sailed and it was very clear. So those expectations were set under the program. But I think all I was trying to say was just because that need is right here, right now, and we've gone through a process with them, I just don't know where they'll be at in another year or two, right? And so I just feel like there's still some opportunity and just all this need that's pent up, whether we do it again this year because we just did it, and maybe we think about offering more time for them to get their funding together, or as we had spoken earlier, do it again this year and then, you know, set a realistic deadline that doesn't go into perpetuity where the vouchers sit on a shelf, a virtual shelf, but maybe offer a little more time, or the ability with under some sort of, you know, guidelines on what would qualify them to extend, meaning they're very close to final funding, right? And we could see the way to giving them another 90 days or something, as long as they're proceeding and making progress. That's where I'm trying to go, so that we don't lose the momentum we had when we tried to do this in 2020. So for 2020, I'm very glad we did 85 vouchers, but we could have done 196. And those bunch of those are still ready and going, what do we got to do, right? And so I just don't want to lose the momentum, but it would require a reset and a do-over, but I think we could improve the program. And I think we're learning. This is, you know, and we learned for some things on this one. So I'm just going to stay with that. But I do I'm with you guys on everything. I'm not in opposition to what's being said. I just don't want to lose the momentum. So thank you.
Yeah, I think maybe some flexibility and looking at a way that we're not going to lose those folks that are close to full funding, giving them extension or whatever that would be needed makes sense to me.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Oh, we lost her.
Who? Oh yeah. Any further discussion? When are we going to see this again, Terry?
Mr. Chair, that's a good question. So as we talked about, what the next steps would be, if you know, there really isn't any action for you to take at this point. I think the action would be when we decide to issue an RFP, the action would be how and how many, you know, what avenue to offer the project-based vouchers. And I'm taking away that we're maybe not there yet. So coming back at a later date when we're ready to have some more discussion on when and how to offer.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Smith. Yeah, I appreciate having a light agenda and a good amount of time to dedicate to this conversation. Anything else for Ms. Smith? Anything? And Director Barajas, Councilmember Wolf.
I just wanted to say thank you. This was a great discussion. I hope you got the information you needed from us.
Thank you. There's no right answer. And so that's what's tough about this. It's trying to find that balance. So thank you. Appreciate all your comments.
Thank you. I agree. It was a great discussion. Director Burrell has anything else for us today?
No, thank you. I just wanted to say the same as Terry. I really appreciate the conversation, and my hand's a little sore from note taking, but it's great.
Thank you. All right. Seeing no further business before this committee today, we are adjourned. Thank you.